Well, it's great to be here. Thank you so much, and I'm so excited to have you here. You know, I know that the name of this is the business value of climate, but we have to start with this little thing that's happening November, you know, this election. And so I wanted to start by just asking your perspective, or in your own words, what are the climate stakes of this election?
The climate stakes of this election could not be higher. To go backwards is not acceptable for the planet. And I can't say enough about the importance of continuing the progress that has been made over the last 3 years, especially the passage of these large bills, bipartisan infrastructure bill, Inflation Reduction Act. But if you look in it, finally, we are investing in the things that need to be invested in to where the U.S. can lead. And if that gets unwound or slowed down, I'm really afraid for the future of our planet.
The word you used backstage for a Trump presidency was terrifying. Can you elaborate a little bit more on why that would be, and specifically what you're watching? And in part because you've watched this before. You were Interior Secretary. You put some rules in place, including rules to track and bring down methane emissions on oil and gas operations on public lands. And then you saw it repealed, or at least paused and get caught up in courts, and there was a pause before it took effect. So what are you worried particularly about this next time around if he is elected?
Yeah, let me just say, it's hard to change regulations. It is not easy. You got to prove your case. You've got to do open public meetings. You've got to do a lot of things. So if you want to stop the venting of methane, which is about as obvious a thing you should do, which of course doesn't gain royalties for the American people or anything else, it just goes up in the atmosphere and accelerates climate change. You have to go through a lot of hoops to do that. Trump took credit for undoing a lot of stuff he didn't actually undo, because he wanted to get credit for it, but they didn't go through the process, and so it got thrown out in court. In some cases, those laws take effect and they continue until a challenge happens, and there was quite a bit of that. So people said, oh, you must be just devastated by what the Trump administration is doing. I said, I'm devastated by what the Trump administration is saying, but they're not actually doing what they said they are doing, because they can't, because it's getting tied up in the courts. A second Trump presidency, more people in the judiciary that may look unfavorably on the kinds of laws that have given us a country that has clean air and clean water, with heroes of mine who's a Republican, the late Bill Ruckelshaus, who brought us mileage standards in cars in the Nixon administration. I mean, these are things that can be unwound in a second Trump presidency with a very different ethos of the judiciary system. So, I mean, I worry about that. I really worry. So, yes, I am terrified. Not terrified about a blowhard and the words that he uses. I am terrified about the system coming unraveled, and I'm terrified about the scientists that we all rely on for our weather forecasting, for our stream gauges, for hurricanes, for earthquakes, all of those people that I worked with in government that are so critical, who are vulnerable with the words that candidate Trump is using right now, which is there's so many public servants. If they are the deep state, then sign me up.
So is Biden the best person to beat Trump?
You know, I have no idea, right? I mean, he'd had a crappy debate. There's no question about that. If Biden or another Democrat is elected, and the kinds of people that are working in government that understand these issues are enabled to continue to do the work that they do, we are fine. If the election is lost, we are not fine. And, you know, I read the same thing that you're reading. I don't know the answer to that, but I do know Joe Biden is a very good man, He's an ethical person. The people around him are ethical. They know what they're doing, and that will continue, whether it's President Biden or somebody else. And that is just really, really important, I think, to the future of our planet. And I'm not, I don't think I'm overstating the case. It's really, really important.
Are you concerned about his age?
I'm concerned about his ability to beat Donald Trump because of what's happening in the polling, of course. I don't think age is the determining factor. I know many people that are older than Joe Biden who are amazing. A number of them have been my mentors. So I don't think it's age, but we've got to get a person in the White House that continues these policies. That is really, really important.
So we talked a little bit about how between a Democratic and a Republican administration, what we've seen is there can be this wild swing in policies. We talked a little bit about the methane rule in particular that you just worked so hard on. I'm curious, if you can elaborate, you're talking a little bit about what it means from a regulation standpoint, but obviously huge swings in regulation and policy send signals to business. So how do you see businesses responding to this, and what is sort of the challenge sort of inherent in that if they cannot, have that confidence that the rules that they are going to be in place and having to follow are still going to be there in 4 years?
Yeah, I mean, the key for businesses don't hate regulations. They hate uncertainty. That is the killer of business. If I'm making an investment that is going to last for 50 years or 30 years, I want to make sure that I'm going to be able to get a return on that investment and the rules aren't going to change. And, I worked in the oil industry early in my career. I worked as a banker with many companies in the natural resource sector. I'm on the boards of companies now, and they don't mind playing by the rules. They can't have rules that keep changing back and forth. And I'll give you a good example. We worked really hard with governors and wildlife agencies from 11 western states, 7 core states, on the protection of habitat called the Sagebrush Sea. And Republican governors, Democratic governors, administrations from all political stripes working together to say, how do we do this? Because the governors did not want to lose control of their ability to develop, okay? Because of their hard work to protect these landscapes, the Fish and Wildlife Service said this species does not need to be listed as endangered, okay? When that happened, the oil companies and everything heaved a sigh of relief because they had the rule book and they knew where they could develop or put transmission lines in or other things. They knew what they had to do and the areas they had to avoid. When Trump came into office and Ryan Zinke was in his brief tenure in the position that I used to hold, he said he was going to undo those rules. The very Republican governor of Wyoming, Matt Mead, who worked hard with us on this, went to the Trump administration and said, please don't. The oil companies are coming to me saying, oh, no, don't reopen this. We have a deal. And the Trump administration tried to undermine it anyway. They had not been successful, at least at that point. But the oil companies are coming to the Republican governor saying, no, 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 we had a deal. We knew the rule book. And that's a good illustration. So businesses hate chaos. They need predictability. And, it's another good example. And I will say there are many, many great Republicans that I've worked with. I don't have a problem with the GOP. I have a problem with the Trump administration and the people that are acolytes of his.
That being said, big business isn't like victimless in just seeing these changes happen. They, as you said, they can reach out to governors. They have a role in sort of being able, maybe not if they don't want to fight for a particular role, you can say fight for certainty. And so what would you recommend, to the many people here are coming from businesses about, I guess, the power that they have in kind of maintaining or securing that kind of certainty?
Yeah, I think businesses have to be at the table. I mean, there's a saying that it just couldn't be more true. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I have found, when I was leading REI, we took for granted public lands that our customers enjoyed recreating on. but we weren't necessarily at the table lobbying for the importance of those public lands or the support for them in the way the oil companies were at the table lobbying for a continuation of the subsidies they have that give them an unfair advantage to drill for oil and gas or coal. And so said, we may not have the money of the oil and gas industry, but we do have grassroots support, and we need to be at the table. We need to reinforce these courageous members of Congress who are trying to do the right thing for the environment and the future and give them our support and put grassroots support behind it. So if you can't compete in the money game, which is very difficult to do, you can compete in the discomfort game, in the reputational risk game, in making sure that people are rewarded for doing the right thing, our elected officials and our public servants, by thanking them for what they do and not just asking for favors. And I think businesses have to be at the table. And I think when I was first CEO of REI, the National Chamber of Commerce came and asked me to join, and I said, why would I want to join? You spend about $400 million a year lobbying against a lot of the things that are really important for my business. And they said, well, why did you meet with us if that was the case? I said, because I'm a business leader and you need to know that preventing taxes and undermining regulations is not in the best interests of many businesses. And if we didn't have this meeting, I wouldn't have an opportunity to tell you that. They said, would you like to be on our board?
So you have worked in a lot of different industries, and I think it's one of your superpowers, right, that you have this huge history in working in different fields in this intersection of business and climate. And one of the things we were talking about is if you want to be a big, reputable company today, there's some things you just have to do on climate. Basically, this floor of climate action, I'm not talking about the leaders who are leading the game, but like everyone has to meet this floor. And kind of, can you talk about where you see that floor is today and how that's shifted in the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years?
Yeah, totally. Being involved in addressing climate change and sustainability as a business, in my view, is table stakes today. You must be there. At REI, I would say the organization was early to the game, and it may be obvious why an REI or a Patagonia is because of the nature of our businesses. But I will say it was harder then. It's not like it's not hard now, but it was harder then because in many cases you may be, in being sustainable, you may be using a different product that, like PFAS chemicals is a good example right now that may not be as effective. You may be using recycled materials that cost more to manufacture. You may be following your own moral compass that is inconsistent with what your competitors are doing, and therefore by doing the right thing you're being placed at a competitive disadvantage. Yeah. I think that thoughtful regulations that align environmental interests with economic success are exactly where we need to go. Mileage standards in cars, great example. Set a target, put it far enough out, work with the auto companies to get there, and then we pay less in gas, we get better mileage, and the planet wins as well. Government that works in partnership with business can help get there.
Yeah.
At REI, we put solar panels on stores, but we did it in states where they had incentives to do that because it was uneconomic to do it. It's become now more economic because the prices of panels have come down and so on. So when you can work collectively on a pathway to where you need to go, and you don't, you talked about the pendulum swinging back and forth, very, very difficult for people in government to have to deal with, the career staffers that are having to deal with this, and for business. But if you work collectively with business and you say, here's where we're going at this point, and here's where we're going at this point, now let's work collectively to get there, you can put the kinds of rules in place that reward the right behavior, and that's really critical. I can give you a quick example if we have time.
Yeah.
Something that we worked on in the Mojave Desert called the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan. Actually, the catalyst for it was the Nature Conservancy, State of California, Bureau of Land Management worked collectively to say, let's drive solar and wind energy, not make the same mistakes that we've made in other development of oil and gas and other minerals, and drive it to the right places. Deconflicted for tribal rights and sacred sites, deconflicted for critical animal habitat, close to disturbance, not in some rich person's view that they're going to, argue about. Do the EIS in advance, and then say to the companies, because California had renewable energy standards, utilities have to do it, go to these areas, we will give you your permit within 90 days. That's money in the bank for those businesses. They have to produce the power because of the California regulations, and so the utilities will give them a purchase power supply contract. With that, they can go to their bank for a loan, they can accelerate renewable energy, and they can do it faster because they went to these areas because they were pre-cleared by government. That, to me, is really good government and thoughtful regulation.
The Biden administration has put in these new rules, is providing more money, but at the end of the day, I think a big thing that's come up as a theme at this festival is the transition to net zero is still hard.
Really hard.
And what do you see as maybe one or two of the most central challenges to companies, not the ones that are thinking about the floor, but the ones that are really kind of hit to the ceiling, that they still are encountering, and how they can move through those challenges?
I mean, one of the toughest things is we are not paying for the cost of putting carbon in our atmosphere. There is no price to any of us as consumers of our use of fossil fuels, of our increase in carbon, and the technology is not yet there to remove carbon. And I know there's some folks here like Banyu Carbon, based here in Seattle, that's working hard on that, and lots of technologies, and that's really, really important. But we have got to reduce our consumption levels. And I think one way to do that is economic incentives to do that. And there are winners and losers, and rural communities get hurt. And if we don't think about how do we address rural communities or agriculture that depends on it, we won't get that done. But that's actually really, really critical. And until we really start at least shining a spotlight on the true impact, I don't think people are going to begin to change their behaviors. I think if it doesn't hit them in the pocketbook in some way, we're not going to change. So, big challenge.
Until there's that true cost there.
Well, I mean, look outside.
Yeah.
It's a little cooler today than it has been. Look what happened just in Texas.
Yeah.
Look at the forest fires. Our planet is in trouble, and it's telling us something.
And yet so often, as someone's been watching the coverage about Hurricane Beryl, they're not often seeing the link being made to climate change with any particular extreme weather. And, what do you wish they were saying? What could you say to that?
Well, I think, let me just say, there is an ecosystem here. There are climate activists who make people uncomfortable, and they are really, really important. There are businesses who are on the cutting edge of this that are trying to do the right thing. There's new ones. They deserve our support. They deserve our business. There are some bad actors. We need to let them know they're bad actors. We need to make them feel uncomfortable. I'm a fan of Greta Thunberg. I'm a fan of the people who at times make me feel uncomfortable, right? I'm a fan of the nonprofit organizations that sued me 3 times a week in government because they serve an important role. I'd rather they would have allowed my fish biologists to do their work in fisheries, but I understand because I was really happy they were there during Trump. So we are all part of an ecosystem that needs to work together. And we have levers that are going to be really important to pull. And I think we need to pull all those levers now because, it's a 5-alarm fire.
Well, I think that's a great place to end it. Let's give a round of applause to Sally Jewell. Thank you so much.